And that will be all. So, since one row is not here yet, I will present my paper, and then I hope she will arrive and we can see the clips. I have many clips to show today, and then we have a presentation on devils on the doorstep. Again, it's a new presentation. So, I read my paper. So you remember I said that I will prepare something on this issue. What is so funny about war? And thinking about this question, the answer would be, provisional answer would be nothing actually. And the question would be a bit different. So it would be maybe, if there is nothing funny about war, how is it that so many comedies take war as a subject or a topic? How is it that even a total war, that is a war without mercy, like the armed conflict in Eastern Asia and in the Pacific from 1937 to 1945, how is it that this war has been inspiring? Sorry, there is a mistake here. Could inspire narratives whose tone is very openly and whose style is very often comic, burlesque, satiric, or farcical. So you can see on this, but it is not at all an exhaustive list. 1941 by Stephen Spielberg, Mr. Roberts by John Ford and Merlin Leroy, Operation Petticoat by Blake Edwards, The Private Navy of Sergeant O'Farrell by Frank Tashlin, and Geisha Boyku by the same Frank Tashlin, and finally South Pacific by Joshua Logan. All of them being American films, and I will tell you why later. So there is a very easy answer to the question which was asked. It is not war. It is not war that is or that can be funny. It is the army, any army taken into consideration as an institution and in any circumstances, that is peace or war. It is the army as a form of power, let's say. The army in times of peace or of war, which is a favorite object for Satan, which constantly inspires satirists in modern societies. We, in general, we, the public, the people, the citizens, we like to mock the army as a disciplinary and rigid institution. And this in particular, since military service exists, that is, since all young men are drafted, at least in European modern nations. And this from the time on the national state has asserted itself through the development of mass armies, that is, drafting millions of young men in the European nations, for example, Western European nations, but others too. So the inclination to make fun of the army This inclination is something much more extensive, much more vague and diverse than the Pacific or anti-militarist attacks on militarism. This attitude, this inclination is rooted in popular culture, in Western countries, in West European countries like France, Germany, etc. And this from the end of the 19th or from the beginning of the 20th century. This kind of culture finds or has an outlet in newspaper at that time, at that epoch. And this through all kinds of caricatures, songs, jokes, etc. But it also has an echo in literature. In France, everybody knows, for example, an author from the beginning of the 20th century, whose name is Georges Courtelis, through novels like those I mentioned here, La vie de caserne, which means everyday life in the barracks, or Les gaietés de l'escadron, that is more or less the joyful squadron. That's at the beginning, at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century in France. Or later, more famous, world famous Good Soldier Schweik, written a novel or series of stories, short stories, written by the Czech novelist Jaroslav Havel. So we have to remember then, and this, of course, to make a very long story short, that Hollywood has been, from the very beginning, from its very beginning, an importation platform for all kinds of European narratives and European narrative forms, all kinds of European inspiration, narrative inspirations, genre, and so on. And example, I'll give you a few examples. If you know, I hope you know, the Marx Brothers, very funny films, Marx Brothers film, Brothers, etc. So if you see this film, this kind of film, you cannot really get the point of these films if you do not have any idea of what Yiddish humor is. Yiddish humor that is from Jewish communities in Eastern Europe. Yiddish humor as some kind of a cultural good borrowed by Hollywood, by the American movie industry from Jewish communities living in Eastern Europe, and which is something extremely special. If we come closer to our topic, that is war, army, we can remember here that the very well-known, world-famous pacifist novel by the German author Erich Maria Remarque, which is called in its original version in German, Im Westen nichts Neues, translated in English, All Quiet on the Western Front. So this novel has been published in 1929. This novel became immediately a film shot in the United States, a much acclaimed Hollywood film, which was shot only 1 year later under the same title by the, at that time, progressive, even semi-communist director Louis Milestone. Milestone, we know him, maybe you remember, because we already met him through this very dubious film, The Purple Heart. This was, we mentioned it and we saw from clips from The Purple Heart at the beginning of this, in one of the first of our lessons. And as a consequence of this, we have to consider here we have to consider that Hollywood on such matters is like managing an heritage or a legacy which comes from Europe. And this management is a gesture which already has become some sort of a tradition. What the Russian or rather Soviet linguist and philosopher Mikhail Bakhtin, what Bakhtin calls ridiculization. I don't know to what extent this word exists in English, but this is the literal translation, ridiculization. So the ridiculization of the army, that is the satire of the army as a ridiculous or laughable object, strictly this meaning to laugh. Ridiculous means something we have to laugh about or can laugh about. So for Bakhtin, the state of ridiculization is inseparable from what he called the carnival spirit or mood. For this reason, all the films we take into consideration here are the elements of all sorts of carnival rites and conducts or gestures whose target is the army. The army, again, as a form of power and as an authoritarian institution. Bakhtin's book, I'm alluding to here, is his most famous work, that is his focus on François Rabelais and the popular culture, which is called in English Rabelais and his work. Title in French is a bit different. And as we will see in the clips from the comedies I have selected, the army at war can be ridiculed from many various angles. It can be ridiculed as an institution made only at that time. Things are changing or have changed already, but made at the time of the Pacific War of men. And for this, you will see this issue is very important. It comes again and again. An institution made only of men and supposedly being frustrated for lack of women. Or it can be, the army can be ridiculed as a hierarchic institution, divided into two species. Officers on one side and rank and file soldiers on the other, with the non-commissioned officers who are, let's say, the junction or meeting point between both, and who have to pass orders from above to below, and who are, for this reason, privileged targets for the authors of these satiric comedies. But as well, army regulations are first put by the book Officers' Conducts. Very often this issue is raised. In short, all what concerns the common culture in the army, all this is liable to be satirized by filmmakers who, and this is very important, by doing this or on this occasion, these filmmakers give voice to the audience. That is, they give voice to the, let hear the point of view on the army of the civilian, as the civilian, by contrast with the soldier, is a free man or woman. By contrast with all the enlisted guys rank and file men who are the captives of this disciplinary and, of course, repressive institution. Another issue is the rivalry between different army corps. If we take the American Army as a pattern, it means infantry, mostly Marines, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force. But, okay, it's more or less the same in other armies. This too, this rivalry, this kind of concurrence is also very often a laughing matter in this field, as well as many other issues, as you will see the incompetence of the commanding officers, the laziness, by contrast, the laziness of the subalterns, the many failures of such a complicated, it's a very complicated system actually, so the failures of this complicated system of institution, and of course, especially, particularly in the conditions of war. I remind just one title, one film, which is a reference on this issue. It doesn't belong to our corpus because it's about the war in Korea at the beginning of the 50s. It is MASH by Robert Altman, who is a very great artist, and this is a very, very funny, interesting comic film. Okay, so this is the first point. My problem is that I wanted now to show the first clip, but one draw is not here. So what should I do? So I go to the second part of my presentation. So making war comedies. This is an art to deal with issues which are grave and serious in a way which makes them light, become light and even funny. This is a way of transfiguring the tragic into a farce. For this reason, many aspects of war have to be ignored by comedies. That is, the murderous fights, blood sufferings, of the wounded and the prisoners, the disarray of the survivors and all the families of the dead, etc., etc. That means that war comedy has to reinvent a war which has become so frivolous or absurd that it can be ridiculed without making the public indignant or the authorities irate. We see here how this is it, the question of the distance to the events, or the facts the film is reenacting is, how this question of distance is important. We cannot actually imagine that a Hollywood filmmaker would have shot a spirited comedy on the attack on Pearl Harbor or the retreat from the Philippines as soon as 1943. Shooting a comedy which has a war in particular as its origin, the Pacific War, the war in Korea and Vietnam, is always the same problem. It is always a way of taking leave from the event in its tragic, dramatic, traumatic dimension. It is a way of emancipating the public, the audience, from this tragic dimension and from its traumatic effects. As a narrative, war comedy always is what we call in French second degree, that is second degree literally. That is, it means something which has not to be taken at face value, which has not to be taken literally, seriously. And this, so what we French call second degree, this is a way of standing back from the dramatic past events, and this by using irony or humor, but always basically the same thing, laughter, and using it as a pharmacon, that is a remedy in Greek, that is a cure against what is harming us, what is making us suffer. Pharmacon is an issue which has been raised by Derrida, among others. So Derrida notices that pharmacon is something very ambiguous. It has to be used with discernment, because if the dose you take is too strong, the remedy will become a poison. And this is why, if we go back to our topic, this is why if the comic pharmacon is not okay, it's not appropriate, there is nothing worse than a war comedy which falls flat, which goes too far. And this is not a question of bad taste. It is not only, let's say, a mess. It is an outrage, it is an offense to all those who keep the memory of this war, in particular, this war the film deals with. So, Pacific War in most of the cases were at stake in the films we will see. So war comedies also have to be taken into consideration as an antidote to the usual or to the standard war films, which are, as a rule, noisy, dramatic, apocalyptic, tragic, sometimes gore, eerie, etc. The comedies, the war comedies, lower the tension associated with war by these films. They, so to say, unplug the tragic by making the audience burst out laughing. For this reason, they have to come always after the serious and grave narrative of war. They appear on the rear of the dramatic narrative of war. The time of war comedy is the time as war, as the dramatic or the traumatic object can begin to cool as an object of collective memory. For this reason, it can be considered as a device intended for helping a community to free itself from the tyranny of memory. It helped the public to remove the spell of the traumatic event. Classic example, a film you maybe know, it's an American war movie on the war in Vietnam, which is called Tropic Thunder by Ben Stiller, whose principle is to revisit, to reenact almost all well-known American films on the war in Vietnam, that is dramatic films, but this to revisit them in a grotesque way. And they say the way this film, Tropic Thunder, tries, is a triumph or exorcise the demons of the devils, the ghosts of the Vietnam War. So, okay, now we will pass to something else. I will show you how a comedy becomes the parody. Wait a second, the parody of a serious film. So, the first film we will see a clip of is the bridge on the River Kwai, which is one of the most famous films on this war in Eastern Asia and in the Pacific. I tell you in a few words. I remind you what it is about. It's a British film which has been shot by David Lean. David Lean is Lawrence of Arabia, etc. And the plot is this: British prisoners of war have to build a bridge on a river in Burma, in occupied Burma, a bridge for a vital railway in enemy-occupied Burma, occupied by the Japanese. But the light commandos are assigned to destroy this bridge after the British prisoners of war have built it, and have built it very carefully, in order to show the Japanese that they know how to do things that the Japanese are not able to do themselves. So there is this kind of game in the film. So just to show you in the bridge on the River Kwai the original picture, which is what the parody you will see just right after that refers to. So it's only a few 2 minutes, I think. And what matters also is the music, of course, because the music of this film, The Bridge on the River Kwai, is one of the most famous film music in all history of cinema, and of course you will see how the parody on the film makes use of the music too. So it's 1 hour and 05 to 1 hour 07. So just before we see the comic version of this scene, I would like to show you another passenger bridge scene. You will be able to compare both the fact what we saw just before and this one. It is from another film by Frank Tashlin, but the difference between both is that one we will see right now, which is called Geisha Boy, is with as the main character Jerry Lewis, and you will see that he changes everything. So first is another version of the passenger bridge from the plane. So you can compare both, and you will tell me which one you prefer. So it's the Geisha Boy. Fancies this. So it's about a group of artists who arrive from California to Tokyo. They are going to perform for the occupation troops, the American occupation troops just after the war in Japan. So there is a star, a woman, you will see, and Jerry Lewis is a loser, an artist with a complete loser, a complete failure, as you will see. Or maybe we can see the credits. It's interesting. It's only 2 minutes. It's the parody of the Orientalist style. Just have a look at the credits. This is, but only the beginning. Yeah, the credit at the beginning. Now the bridge again. The reenactment of the bridge scene. Okay. Just one detail, interesting detail on this. Of course, it is the same actor, and as this actor, I forget his name, he's a famous Japanese actor, as he had to perform in Lean's film, it was extremely difficult for him because he couldn't speak English. So he had to learn to speak English because, okay, it's all in English. They are talking in English. And it says, okay, another time we can talk about this. Because in the clash between the two colonels, he with the commander of the camp where the British prisoners of war are kept, and Alain with the British colonel who is leading the group of the prisoners. There's some kind of a clash, a moral clash between both of them, and the bridge is the issue for that. So he has to speak English with the British prisoners, and for this actor it was extremely difficult, and it made David Lean very nervous. So they argued constantly, and it is said that it went so far that sometimes this tough guy, you see here, cried during the shooting because he couldn't speak English as Lean told him to speak English. So this is part of the story, of course. So, okay, but you see how comedy here reenacts a scene or something from a standard film from the time, the narratives on this war had to be dramatic, serious, grave, etc. Okay. No comments, no questions? You only want to entertain yourself this evening, I imagine, not to work, just entertain yourself. Okay, you will have more entertainment. Where was I? Okay, point three. Okay, point three. A comedy's fate and future relies, of course, on the talent of its authors and of the actors. You saw it here about Joey Lewis, of the actors who play in it. But it relies, we have to know that it relies before all on a whole set of recipes and rules. And this applies to war comedies as to any other sort of comedy. So there has to be no idle time. The rhythm or the pace has to be kept constantly, and it is a crucial issue in war comedies as in any kind of comedy. There has to be a constant relaunch, reviving of the action. Unexpected, unusual situations have to appear constantly. Gags, I would say. Some words on gags later. Also very precise, very quick acting. That means that making faces or grimacing is not enough. Jokes are needed and witty remarks, quick and brisk dialogue, constant overlapping in verbal exchanges, double meaning sentences. You will see a bright example of that in the clips we'll see later. And if you look carefully at any of the films I have mentioned, you will see that these recipes used in them are basically always the same. And for the rest, of course, everything relies or depends on the talent of the filmmaker and of the professional abilities of his team and crew. There are also technical aspects in it. And, okay, it seems to me that we can immediately, or almost immediately, feel the difference between an ordinary comedy by Frank Tashlin, the first one we saw, Tashlin being an honest piece worker, and as we will see later, a comedy by Blake Edwards, who is a very brilliant, very professional comedy maker. And also, you can see when Jerry Lewis, the gag on the passenger bridge. Well, okay, it's a film by Frank Tashlin, but it's about and it's Jerry Lewis' job. Well, Jerry Lewis is at times a pure genius. So we will see at the end clips from Operation Petticoat, which is, I think, one of the best of these war comedies on war in the Pacific. And then we will see how perfect situation comedy works, because it is a situation comedy. Location is submarine. So how it works? We constantly pass, and this almost without any transition from a funny situation or scene to another. Each of these scenes or situations being boosted by gags, by jokes, by spirited dialogues, and brilliant actors and brilliant actors' performances. So the golden rule is that it being action in relation with hilarious situations, it should never stop. It should never stop. It should never, action should never be slowed down by that kind of useless, sentimental, serious talk you have in brave war films. And this you will see until the very last picture, which cannot be separated from the last gag of the film. So, some words about the gag. What is a gag, basically? A gag is something we can define as the shortest comic unit in a film. A gag has a function to relaunch or to reawaken, to reboot the comic device, that is, to spice up a situation. A gag is usually based on visual effects. And this is the reason why late in depicting a gag is almost always doomed to failure. If you tell about a film, oh, I saw it was such a funny gag, and you begin to recount that, it doesn't work. Because it is instantaneous, it's visual, and it's intended not for making just the spectators smile, be slightly amused, but basically for making him burst out laughing. And if it doesn't, it is a flop. And this is the reason why the art of the gag is so difficult, is so delicate. And this is the reason why professional gagmen, it's a job. It's a profession, it's a specialty. Professional gagmen are hired by the Hollywood film industry. A gag which falls flat ruins the rhythm, the pace of a comedy. So from this angle, it's more than a failure, it's a crime. against the spirit of the comedy. If you look at some of the war comedies I have listed, you will immediately be sensitive to the difference between a good and a bad gag. Instead of making you laugh, a bad gag reminds you that the comedy is something artificial, that it is before all made of recipes, that it is a perfect artifact whose rules and conventions have to become invisible, imperceptible by the audience, and this thanks to the magic of the frenetic rhythm and thanks to the sort of trance or days in which the audience has to be plunged by the narrative. There is always something which is beyond excitement in this kind of comedy. When it works, of course, that is something hypnotic. There has to be something hypnotic in a good comedy. And a bad gag breaks this spell, this hypnotic effect. This magic, the magic of the enchantment of the comedy, is what makes it possible for a Blake Edwards, as you will see, to stage a Japanese air raid on an American submarine as something quite hilarious. What comedy has in common with the carnival is also this. It dismisses, it dethrones what holds a high position in the life of a society, of a nation, of a state. It inverts the signs of what stands above and what stands below, what is below. And this is what makes it possible, as you will see, what makes it possible for Blake Edwards in Operation Petticoat to depict the commanding officer of the Sea Tiger, which is a submarine, very serious name, for a submarine of the American Navy during the Pacific War, to depict him not as a gallant fighter, as most of the serious submarine films of this period do, but to depict him as just, let's say, a decent fellow, constantly overtaken by events as barring accidents, incidents take place, which step by step transform his submarine into some kind of a Noah Ark, as it has to give shelter to all kinds of people, military nurses, refugees, babies, pregnant women, and even animals. For by the magic of comedy, the inflexible warrior becomes a very anti-heroic figure, that of a sort of mock chief of a very odd, multi-colored tribe which drifts away on the ocean. Okay, so on the issue carnival, we will see now some clips from Mr. Roberts. I don't find it so funny, but okay, on the issue of carnival, it has to be this maybe. Where is it? Here. So it's about a cargo ship which is called the Reluctant, and which is in the rear areas of the Pacific theater of operations in during the war in the Pacific. So the captain, Lieutenant Commander Morton, played by James Cagney. Okay, I cannot speak. So he's a very serious, despotic man, and he conflicts with another officer who tries to protect the crew. So it's about the conflict between these two men on this ship, which is on the rear of the battle, far from the places where the fights take place. From Spielberg's film, 1941, so the beginning of the film, we will see how it works. So it's about a collective psychosis after Pearl Harbor, about the invasion of California by Japanese troops. So you see, you will see, I should just show you the three first scenes, how it works, some kind of a piling up scenes which are very loosely related to each other, but it has to go on constantly, never to stop. So just to show you how it works, it's not, I don't think that this is a masterpiece, but okay. It's part of our game. The first one, the first scene is not bad. So I read you my last part. So, as you see, I present only American films. Okay, I would have liked very much to mobilize to Japanese and Chinese films, but I failed in doing this because, first, Devils on the Doorstep would have been, of course, a perfect material for us, but you, students, have monopolized it for your presentations. Okay? And also, I tried to find a Japanese film I was interested in, which is called The Human Bullet or Human Guinea Pig, but I couldn't find an edition with subtitles. So what I was interested in this film is the fact that it has been shot in 1968 and it depicts, as I read about it, depicts in a very satirical way the kamikaze, but that is what I was interested in, this film. So the question would be, in relation with this film, is satire necessary comic, or has it to be funny or hilarious? Okay, but I couldn't see it with subtitles. I remember still, I would mention a Japanese film, which is a very typical film for all the humanist pacifist period of the Japanese movie. I will talk about this second semester. And this film is called Dr. Akagi by Shoei Imamura, who shot Black Rain, and we spoke about. It was shot in 1998, and in this film we see some quite funny episodes which punctuate the action. This film is not actually a comedy. In a few words, it's about a medical doctor who does his very best to take care of his patients in a village, in an island, and this under the very difficult conditions of the Second World War. And he's, as a physician who cares about poor people as much as about powerful bureaucrats or officers, is a moral model which is opposed by Imamura to the classic idols or heroes of the militarist narrative of this period. But this character also has a comic dimension, for he has some kind of an obsession, idée fixe, which is the liver. That is that whatever the symptoms are of his patients are, he always goes to this point, hepatitis, A, B, or C, as a disease he considers as deriving from the war conditions. And Imamura draws comic effects from the repetition of the scenes where, after examining the patient, Dr. Agaki triumphantly gives his statement, his diagnosis, hepatitis. And for this very reason, he has been nicknamed by the people Dr. Liver. And he constantly conflicts with medical authorities who blame his liver mania, but also his dedication to ordinary people more than to the military state. So, okay, from this example, we can derive, I will not have time to put a clip from this film, but okay, let's have it in memory. And we can derive two remarks from this. First is that a film can be dotted with comic scenes or situations without being a comedy. In a film whose plot is very tense, very grave, whose action is dramatic, these comic moments will have a recreational, relaxing effect. If you know something on John Ford's work, you have noticed that John Ford is an expert in the use of this relief or lightning effect. All John Ford's films, war films, Western films, adventure films, provide such effects. And we saw some clips from They Were Expendable, and you can check in They Were Expendable, a film on defeat and sacrifice. You find the same kind of relaxing moments, comic relaxing moments. This was the first remark. Second remark, it is very clear for me that different cultures do not share immediately or spontaneously the same sense of humor. That is, that what makes us French people laugh very often leaves the Germans, our neighbors, impassive. Not to say anything about Chinese people, of course. If there is something which is related to cultural patterns, it is laugh, irony, humor. And what makes fun in general. We French people, for example, make a lot of jokes which are intended for deriding the Belgian people. Jokes which do not amuse the Belgian people at all, as a rule. And I always wondered if Woody Allen's almost private jokes from the Jewish areas from New York City, that is basically from the West European Yiddish land, if these almost private jokes by Woody Allen in his film are really so funny and so witty for his global, non-Jewish audience, let's say in Calcutta, in Hong Kong, or Johannesburg. So we have today, the film we see, the clips we see, we have an occasion to make a transcultural experience on this issue. That's what makes me laugh in films like 1941, Geisha Boy, Operation Petticoat. Does it make you laugh too? Does comic war, or do comic war movies unveil universal rules on the art of making the audience having a good laugh? And finally, very crucial issue. And this in relation with the discussion we had previously on Hiroshima-Nagasaki film. This very question would be, can we detect or can we spot exceptional historical objects which would be totally, definitely incompatible with comic, that is, with comic effects, laughter? In other terms, can we imagine a spirited comic film of France on the atomic destruction of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, or as well on the rape of Nanjing on comfort women, that kind of subject. So the immediate answer, common sense, let's say, common sense would dictate us here would be no, of course. But we have to think it over. Is it so sure? I will give you an example, but maybe it is not so sure. About a decade ago, the Italian filmmaker Roberto Benigni has been in the news all over the world, and especially in the West, as he shot the film, which you maybe know, which is called Life is Beautiful, La Vita è Bella. This film is about an Italian Jewish father who is sent during the Second World War, of course, who is sent with his young son to a Nazi extermination camp. This man, this good father, makes all his efforts to protect, to reassure his son by concealing the dark reality of the camp, by inventing all kinds of diversions and mix-ups, and there's still the bitter end. This film is both very funny and very brave. In terms of reception and public now, after some hesitation, this film has been accepted by the Jewish communities around the world, in Western Europe, in Northern America, and after that, consequently, almost unanimously praised, lauded all around the world. So the question would be for us, is an equivalent of this film conceivable whose object would be Hiroshima, Nagasaki, for example? Of course, it is very hard to imagine that, but I must say that Benigni's audacious film was hardly imaginable because before it was shot and released too. So the question is maybe open, more open than we could imagine. So, and I will leave the fifth part, you can read it after that. It's not so important because we have so Operation Petticoat. This is, for me, this is the best comedy on the issue, and that's why I would like to show at least the beginning of it. Where is it? Where is it? It's no, sorry, it's here. It's, yes, what I said in the last part, in the fifth short remark I make, it's about films which can become funny in retrospect without having any intention of being funny. And the example I have in mind here is a film, a submarine film, with as the main character Ronald Reagan, and as second character his wife, who was an actress too, Nancy Davis, and it's a very kitsch film. It's a very mediocre, bad film, and of course, in retrospect, you can see that even mediocre, bad actors can reach dizzy heights. So that's why it is somehow funny to see this kind of bad film after.